They called her the ugliest woman in London, and for 7 years Eleanor Ashford let the world believe it was true. Not because she agreed, but because hiding was easier than hoping. Pity cut deeper than cruelty, and she had learned early that when society decided your worth, fighting it only bled you dry. So she made herself invisible and told herself it was a choice. Everything had changed when she was 15. That year was meant to be her season. Her father, the Earl of Ashford, had promised that London would finally know her name. Eleanor had practiced her curtsy until her knees ached. She memorized dances, dreamed of candlelit ballrooms, and imagined a gentleman who would see her across a crowded room and choose her. 3 days before her debut, the carriage accident happened. She remembered none of the noise, none of the chaos. What she remembered was waking in her bedroom, with her face wrapped in bandages and her mother crying beside her. The surgeon spoke gently, telling her father she was lucky to be alive. The glass had missed her eye. She would heal. What he did not need to say was that the scar would never leave. It ran from the corner of her left eye down to her jaw, pale and cruel. In those first weeks, Eleanor could not bear to look at herself. Her mother covered every mirror with dark cloth, as if someone had died. Perhaps someone had. The girl who dreamed of love did not survive that ride. London judged quickly. Whispers spread before Eleanor ever left her bed. Such a tragedy, they said. She might have been pretty. Now she would never marry. Poor thing. The words reached her through servants who heard them in kitchens and hallways. Within weeks, Eleanor was no longer a debutante. She was a warning. At 18, her father convinced her to attend one last ball. He believed people would see past the scar if they saw her smile. Eleanor wore green silk and arranged her hair to hide the left side of her face. It did not matter. Near midnight, she heard a young lord laugh and say the words that followed her for years. London's ugliest. She did not cry. She finished her champagne, asked her father to take her home, and the next morning told him she would never attend another ball. If London wanted her invisible, she would disappear completely. She retreated to Ashford Park and the stables she had loved as a child. Horses did not stare. They did not whisper. They did not care about scars. Eleanor learned their temperaments, their bloodlines, their needs. Among them, she was whole. On a stormy night, a black foal was born in thunder and rain. Her father named him Midnight Storm and said he would change everything. Eleanor did not believe in signs anymore, but she loved the horse fiercely. He grew fast and strong, and by 3 years old he was the fastest in England. Offers poured in. Fortunes were promised. Her father refused them all. Midnight Storm was family. Then the Duke of Ravensmore came. Alexander Blackwood was known everywhere. Tall, dark, dangerously handsome, with eyes like winter skies. He was admired and feared in equal measure. He was also known for gambling and debts that followed him like shadows. He came once, then again, each time offering more money. Each time her father refused. On the 4th visit, something changed. Eleanor learned of it through a letter. The Duke would marry her. In return, Midnight Storm would become her dowry. There was no proposal, no affection, just a bargain. Eleanor should have been angry. Instead, she felt empty. She was 22, long past hope. At least as a duchess, she would have purpose. She agreed. The wedding took place on a cold December morning in the small chapel at Ashford Park. Eleanor wore her mother's dress and a veil so thick she could barely see. She walked down the aisle alone. The Duke did not look at her until she reached his side. When he did, his eyes were cool and assessing. No warmth, no curiosity, only calculation. They spoke their vows. He did not kiss her. The carriage ride to Ravensmore Hall passed in silence. Eleanor watched frost-covered fields through the window while the Duke stared away from her. She wondered if he thought only of the horse. Ravensmore Hall rose from the mist like a tomb, stone and silence. Servants lined up, faces blank. Eleanor felt their judgment without a word being spoken. Her chambers were grand and cold, blue and silver, a bed large enough to get lost in, a room fit for a duchess and empty of comfort. She sat before the mirror that night and lifted her veil. The scar stared back. But beneath it she saw her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn jaw. She saw survival. Footsteps approached. The Duke knocked. Once. Twice. Eleanor stood, crossed the room, and locked the door. The click was soft, but it felt like thunder. His voice came through the wood, surprised. Was something wrong? Her heart pounded, but her voice did not shake. You married me for a horse, your grace. You shall have him. But you will not have me. Not tonight. Not until you earn the right to stand before me as more than a man collecting a purchase. Silence followed, long and heavy. Then he laughed. Not kindly, not cruelly, with interest. In that moment, Eleanor realized she had done something dangerous. She had made the Duke of Ravensmore curious. The days after the wedding night passed in a strange quiet. Eleanor waited for anger, for commands, for the Duke to remind her that the law stood firmly on his side. A locked door meant nothing to a husband who wished to force it open. She prepared herself for that reckoning. It never came. Alexander Blackwood did not mention the locked door. He did not scold or threaten. Instead, he watched. At breakfast, he sat at the far end of the long table, his gray eyes following her over the rim of his cup. In the halls, she felt his gaze linger when he thought she was unaware. It was not desire, it was not cruelty, it was the look of a man studying something that no longer fit the story he had told himself. The household was uneasy. The servants whispered. Mrs. Blackwood, the stern housekeeper, addressed Eleanor with stiff formality that felt sharper than open rudeness. The maids speculated behind gloved hands. A duchess who locked her husband out on the wedding night was already a scandal, even if no one dared speak it aloud. Only one soul at Ravensmore Hall treated Eleanor as if she belonged. She was 8 years old and named Lily. Eleanor first saw her in the library, tucked into a window seat with a book far too large for her small hands. She expected the child to flee when discovered. Instead, Lily looked up calmly and announced that she liked stories about brave women who survived terrible things. Something in the child's fearless gaze unsettled Eleanor. Lily did not stare at her scar, she stared at her eyes. They became unlikely friends. Lily followed Eleanor through the gardens and halls, asking questions no adult dared ask. Why do grown people pretend? Why do beautiful houses feel lonely? Why do horses listen better than people? Eleanor had no easy answers, but she listened. On the 5th day, Eleanor went to the stables. Midnight Storm had arrived from Ashford Park the morning after the wedding. She had watched from her window as grooms struggled to guide him. Even from a distance, she saw the tension in his powerful body, the restless fire that only he carried. When Eleanor stepped inside his stall, he recognized her instantly. He pressed his nose to her shoulder and breathed out a low sound of comfort. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. That was how Alexander found her. He stood in the doorway, silent, watching his horse and woman lean together as if they had always belonged side by side. He comes to you, he said quietly. He will not allow anyone else near him. I raised him, Eleanor replied. To him I am safe. Alexander stepped closer, wonder softening his sharp features. Show me, he said. Show me how you earn his trust. She hesitated. Power was rare in her life, but she nodded. Move slowly. Do not stare at him. Let him feel your heartbeat. Alexander obeyed. When Eleanor guided his hand to the horse's neck, she felt tension tremble through him. Fear, carefully hidden. Midnight Storm accepted the touch, curious, but calm. Trust is not taken, Eleanor said softly. It is given. Alexander looked at her then, truly looked, as if seeing past the scar for the first time. Is that what you are waiting for? He asked. For me to earn yours. I am waiting for you to see me, Eleanor replied. Something changed in his eyes. He reached toward her face, hesitated, then touched only the unscarred curve of her cheek with a gentleness that stole her breath. I see you, he said, and what I see is fire. He left the stables without another word. That night, Eleanor did not lock her door. She waited beside the dying fire, wrapped in her mother's shawl, heart beating with equal fear and hope. Midnight passed. The Duke did not come. In the morning, she found a single white rose outside her door and a note written in careful script. I am not yet worthy, but I am trying. Her resolve cracked. Days softened into something almost gentle. Alexander sought her out. They spoke in the library, the gardens, the stables. He spoke of his childhood, of a father who gambled away everything, of a mother who died of shame. Eleanor spoke of her accident, her years of isolation, her choice to disappear. They did not touch, they did not speak of love, but something fragile grew between them. Then the letter arrived. It bore her father's seal. Eleanor read it alone and felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Alexander's interest in Midnight Storm had never been only financial. He had made a wager with Lord Hartington. Winner would take everything. When Alexander realized he could not win without Midnight Storm, he agreed to marry Eleanor because she was the price. She burned the letter, hands shaking. That evening she dressed in crimson silk and left her scar uncovered. When Alexander called her beautiful, the word felt like a knife. She confronted him across the long dining table. She spoke of the wager, the bet, the lie. Alexander did not deny it. He spoke of desperation, of vengeance, of a rival who had destroyed his father. He admitted the truth plainly, painfully. "I married you because I needed the horse," he said. "I stayed because I came to know you." Eleanor listened, heartbreaking and mending all at once. She refused to forgive him easily. She refused to be managed. If he wanted the horse, if he wanted her, he would have to earn both. Alexander told her everything that night. His debts, his fear, his hatred of becoming his father. For the first time, Eleanor saw him not as a duke or a villain, but as a man trapped by legacy. The night before the Epsom Derby, Eleanor could not sleep. She found herself again in the stables, whispering to Midnight Storm, begging him to win not for pride but for hope. Alexander found her there. He spoke without armor. He confessed his love, not as demand, but as truth. "I love you," he said, "whether you ever return it or not." Eleanor stopped him from leaving. She did not promise love. She promised honesty. She promised herself. They kissed, gently, carefully, like two wounded souls choosing to trust. On the morning of the race, Eleanor dressed without hiding. Midnight Storm ran like a force of nature. He won. Alexander lifted Eleanor in his arms before the crowd. For the first time she was not invisible. But as they celebrated, Eleanor saw Lord Hartington watching, his eyes cold and calculating. Victory, she sensed, would not end the danger. And somewhere deep inside, she knew the hardest test was still to come. The joy of victory followed them home like sunlight after a long storm, but Eleanor felt unease beneath the celebration. Ravensmore Hall was filled with laughter again, servants smiling more freely, doors opening that had once stayed closed. Alexander moved through the house lighter, as if a great weight had finally been lifted from his shoulders. Yet Eleanor remembered the look in Lord Hartington's eyes at Epsom. It had not been the look of a defeated man. It had been the look of someone already planning his next strike. For a time, happiness came easily. Alexander courted her, as he promised. Flowers appeared every morning. He read poetry aloud by the fire, sometimes badly, sometimes with surprising tenderness. He listened when she spoke, truly listened, as if her thoughts mattered more than his own pride. Slowly, carefully, Eleanor allowed herself to believe. They shared their bed at last, on a quiet spring night, when the gardens were heavy with the scent of roses. Alexander touched her with reverence, not as something owed to him, but as something precious. When he kissed the scar on her face without hesitation, Eleanor wept. In his arms she felt beautiful, not in spite of what she had survived, but because of it. London, however, did not soften so easily. When they returned for the season, whispers followed them through every ballroom. The Duke, who married London's ugliest for a horse. The scarred Duchess who dared to show her face. Eleanor felt the stares like pinpricks on her skin, but she did not hide. She stood tall beside her husband, her hand resting on his arm, refusing to shrink. The invitation to Lord Hartington's ball arrived in gilded script. Alexander knew it was a trap. Eleanor knew it too. Refusing would signal weakness. They went. Hartington House glittered with excess. its chandeliers blazing, its guests eager for spectacle. Eleanor felt eyes lock onto her the moment she entered. Some curious, some cruel, some calculating. She danced, she smiled, she endured. Near midnight she excused herself, needing air. The corridors were quiet and dim, lined with portraits of smug ancestors. She was turning a corner when voices reached her ears. Hartington's voice was unmistakable. "The forgery is flawless," he said. "By the time Blackwood knows, the estate will be gone." Another man laughed softly. "And the Duchess. She will be ruined along with him." Eleanor's heart thundered. She pressed herself into shadow and listened as Hartington spoke of false documents, of old debts, of presenting evidence to strip Alexander of Ravensmoor. It was not enough to lose at Epsom. Hartington wanted humiliation, destruction. Eleanor stepped into the room before fear could stop her. Hartington turned, startled, his false smile slipping. "You should not be here, Duchess." "Neither should criminals planning forgery," Eleanor replied calmly. The men laughed at first, then they saw her eyes. She spoke clearly, loudly enough for the door behind her to carry sound. She accused them of forgery, of conspiracy, of intent to destroy a noble house through lies. Hartington sneered. "Who will believe you?" Then Alexander's voice cut through the room. "I will." He stood in the doorway, flanked by guests who had followed the noise. Noblemen, ladies, witnesses. Hartington's face drained of color. The truth spilled out under pressure. Lies collapsed. Within days, the scandal consumed London. Hartington's reputation shattered. Creditors descended. He fled England in disgrace. Ravensmoor was safe. But something else changed. Society's whispers shifted. Eleanor was no longer only the scarred bride. She was the woman who stood firm when threatened, who protected her husband, who refused to be broken. People began to look at her differently. More importantly, she looked at herself differently. Months passed. The seasons turned. Eleanor found joy in simple things. Morning rides, evenings by the fire. Lily curled beside her with a book, reading aloud with fierce concentration. Alexander laughed more easily now, his darkness softened by purpose. One autumn morning, Eleanor woke with a strange certainty. She was with child. Alexander's joy was quiet and overwhelming. He held her as if she were something fragile and precious. For the first time, Eleanor allowed herself to imagine a future without fear. Their daughter was born on a bright morning when leaves burned gold outside the windows. She was small, perfect, with dark hair and bright eyes. They named her Rose. As Eleanor held her child, tears filled her eyes, not from pain, but from gratitude. She thought of the girl she had been, the one who believed her life had ended at 15. She wished she could reach back through time and tell her that survival was only the beginning. Alexander kissed Eleanor's scar gently. "You are beautiful," he whispered. Eleanor smiled. "I am loved," she said, "and that is more than enough." In the years that followed, Ravensmoor thrived. Midnight Storm's legacy lived on. Lily grew into a fierce, clever young woman with endless curiosity. Eleanor walked through London without lowering her eyes. They no longer called her London's ugliest. They called her strong. And when her daughter one day asked about the scar on her mother's face, Eleanor held her close and told her the truth, that once the world tried to break her and failed.